July 23, 1943. 0600 hours. The air near Gela, Sicily, smells like death and diesel fuel. Private First Class Jacob Henderson crouches over the open hood of a Willys MB Jeep, his hands black with engine oil and streaked with the red dust that covers everything in this godforsaken corner of the Mediterranean. Around him, 5 other Jeeps sit silent, dead mechanical corpses with their hoods propped open like tombstones marking where ambition died and military procedure failed. The morning heat is already building, and Henderson can feel sweat carving clean lines through the dirt on his face. He's 19 years old. 6 months ago, he was fixing tractors in Nebraska. Now he's about to be court-martialed. The problem is simple, brutal, and everywhere. The brand new Willys MB Jeeps, these supposed miracles of American engineering that were going to win the war, are dying by the dozens across Sicily. Overheating. Seizing. Cracking cylinder heads like eggshells under the Mediterranean sun. The official army mechanics, trained at Fort Holabird with their pristine manuals and regulation procedures, are losing this fight. They follow the book. They requisition proper parts. They wait for supply chains that move at the speed of bureaucracy while soldiers die because they can't move ammunition, can't evacuate wounded, can't maneuver. Henderson doesn't wait for parts. Behind him, Sergeant Frank Kowalski watches with arms crossed, his face set in that special expression of disgust that career NCOs reserve for farm boys who think they know better than the United States Army. Kowalski has been writing Henderson for weeks now. Farm boy fixes, he calls them. Hillbilly engineering. Yesterday, when Henderson suggested a modification to the cooling system using parts scavenged from an abandoned Italian truck, Kowalski laughed in his face. This ain't your daddy's tractor, Henderson. This is military equipment. We do things by the book. The book says to requisition parts. The book says to follow established repair procedures. The book says that unauthorized modifications to Army equipment can result in court-martial. The book doesn't say what to do when your entire motor pool is dying and the Germans are 8 miles away. Henderson's hands move with the confidence of someone who's been elbow-deep in engines since he was tall enough to reach a carburetor. His father ran a farm outside Omaha where nothing ever broke at a convenient time, where the nearest dealership was 40 miles away, and where you learned to make do with what you had where you didn't eat. He'd grown up with the philosophy that an engine is an engine, whether it's pulling a plow or pulling a howitzer, the principles don't change. Metal expands when it heats. Fluids flow from high pressure to low. Combustion requires fuel, air, and spark in the right proportions at the right time. Everything else is just details. The modification Henderson is installing would make any textbook mechanic scream. He's rerouted the cooling system using radiator hoses scavenged from a destroyed German Kübelwagen, added an auxiliary overflow tank fabricated from an old fuel can, and rewired the temperature gauge using copper wire stripped from an abandoned Italian farmhouse. The ignition timing has been advanced 3 degrees beyond factory specifications. The fuel mixture has been enriched to compensate for the poor quality gasoline they've been getting. And he's done something truly heretical. He's modified the oil circulation system to increase flow to the hottest parts of the engine, using a hand-carved wooden spacer to adjust the pressure relief valve. It's the spacer that's going to get him court-martialed. You don't carve engine parts out of wood. You order them from supply. You wait. You follow procedure. You trust that the engineers at Willis Overland in Toledo, Ohio, knew what they were doing when they designed this vehicle to military specifications. Except those engineers designed the Jeep for American weather, American fuel, American operating conditions. They didn't account for sustained operation in 110-degree heat with fuel that's half paraffin and roads that are mostly rock and malice. They didn't account for drivers who've been awake for 36 hours straight, maintaining speeds that would make the test drivers weep, hauling loads that exceed specifications because when you're being shot at, you don't leave ammunition behind because the manual says you're overweight. Henderson knows all this because he's been watching the Jeeps die. He's been cataloging the failures, noting the patterns, understanding the why behind the breakdowns. It's the same process he used on the farm when the Farmall tractor started running rough every August: observe, hypothesize, test, adjust. Scientific method learned in dirt and diesel, not laboratories and lecture halls. Henderson. Kowalski's voice cuts through the morning like a blade. Captain wants to see you. Now. This is it. The court-martial he's been expecting. Someone reported him, probably Kowalski himself, for unauthorized modifications to military equipment. There's probably a very official-sounding regulation number attached to the charge. There will be paperwork. There will be consequences. Henderson wipes his hands on a rag that might have been white once, back before the war made everything the color of mud and blood. He doesn't hurry. The engine is almost done, and rushing mechanical work is how you make mistakes that get people killed. He torques down the last bolt, checks the hose connections one more time, then carefully lowers the hood. The Jeep looks exactly like every other Willys MB in theater. Olive drab paint, white star on the hood, registration numbers stenciled on the bumper. Nothing about its exterior suggests that its guts have been rearranged by a farm boy with ideas above his station. I said now, Private. Kowalski is turning red, which Henderson has learned means the sergeant is about 2 minutes from apoplexy. Yes, Sergeant. Henderson's voice carries that flat Midwest neutrality that city people mistake for stupidity. Let them. Underestimation is an advantage. The walk to the battalion command post takes them past the motor pool graveyard where dead Jeeps sit in rows like casualties of a mechanical plague. 14 vehicles out of commission. 14. That's nearly a third of the total transport capacity offline because of a problem that Henderson could fix if they just let him. But they won't. Because he's a farm boy. Because he never went to a technical school. Because his solutions don't come from manuals approved by officers who've never had their hands dirty. Captain James Morrison is bent over a map table when Henderson enters, his finger tracing roads that wind through the Sicilian interior. He doesn't look up immediately, and Henderson uses the time to inventory the situation. 2 lieutenants flanking Morrison. A major from Division Motor Transport standing in the corner with the expression of someone who's been delivering bad news. And in the opposite corner, surprisingly, is Technical Sergeant Daniel Archer, the senior mechanic who runs the battalion's maintenance section, one of the few regular Army guys who hasn't treated Henderson like a yokel with delusions. Private First Class Henderson reporting is ordered, sir. Morrison looks up, and Henderson is surprised to see not anger in the captain's face, but exhaustion. Henderson. Tech Sergeant Archer here has been telling me some interesting things about you. Says you've been making unauthorized modifications to battalion vehicles. Here it comes. Henderson keeps his face neutral, his posture correct. Yes, sir. I have. The lieutenants exchange glances. Kowalski, standing by the door, looks vindicated. But Morrison just nods slowly, like Henderson has confirmed something he already knew. Division Motor Transport has declared 12 more Jeeps unserviceable as of this morning, Morrison continues. That puts us at 26 vehicles out of action. That's 43% of our mechanized transport capacity. We're supposed to begin advancing inland at 0800 hours tomorrow. We're supposed to maintain supply lines across 30 miles of mountain roads while engaging an enemy who knows this terrain better than we do. And we're supposed to do all of this with less than half our vehicles functioning. His voice is perfectly calm, which somehow makes the situation sound even worse. Sir, I can fix them, Henderson says. The words are out before he can stop them, before he can calculate the risk of volunteering for what might be a trap. The major from Division Motor Transport speaks up, his voice carrying the clipped precision of someone reading from a script. The Willys MB Jeep is designed to operate in temperatures up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit under standard load conditions. Current conditions exceed those parameters. The solution is to reduce operating tempo and payload until replacement vehicles can be brought forward from the depot in Algiers. Estimated time for replacement delivery is 7 to 10 days. 7 to 10 days. The Germans won't wait 7 to 10 days. The war won't pause while supply requisitions forms in triplicate. Sir, with respect to the major, that's horseshit. Henderson watches Kowalski's face go purple, but Morrison raises a hand for silence. The Jeeps aren't dying because they're bad vehicles. They're dying because they're being operated outside their design parameters, and nobody's adjusting for that. It's like, he struggles for an analogy these men will understand. It's like taking a horse that's been raised in Kentucky and expecting it to run the same in Death Valley without changing how you water it, feed it, or pace it. The engine's fundamentally sound. It just needs adaptation. Adaptation. The Major makes it sound like Henderson has suggested witchcraft. Private, these vehicles were designed by trained engineers with years of education and experience. What makes you think you know better than Willis Overland's entire design team? It's the question Henderson has been asked his entire life, in a dozen different forms. What makes you think you know better than your teachers, than the foreman, than the manual, than people with degrees and credentials and authority? The answer is simple and impossible to explain to someone who's never had to make a tractor run on baling wire and prayer because the crop won't wait for proper parts to arrive. Sir, I don't know better than them about building a Jeep from scratch. But I know engines. I know what they need, and I know what happens when they don't get it. Those engineers built a beautiful machine for American roads and American supply chains. We're not on American roads, and our supply chains are about 3,000 miles longer than they planned for. The vehicle needs to evolve, or it dies. Silence fills the command post. Outside, Henderson can hear the distant rumble of artillery fire from the front lines. The war continues, indifferent to their problems. Morrison finally speaks. Tech Sergeant Archer tells me you modified one of the Jeeps this morning. The one assigned to Recon Platoon, 3rd Squad. Yes, sir. Start it up. The walk back to the motor pool feels like a death march, except it's Henderson's idea that's on trial, not him. Yet, the entire command staff follows, Morrison, the 2 lieutenants, the major from division, Tech Sergeant Archer, and of course Kowalski, probably hoping to see this farm boy's unconventional fixes fail spectacularly. A crowd is gathered. Word spreads fast in a battalion, especially word about someone potentially getting their ass handed to them by officers. Drivers, mechanics, riflemen with nothing better to do, they form a loose perimeter around the modified Jeep, watching with the detached interest of men who've seen enough war to know that anything could happen. Henderson approaches the Jeep, acutely aware of every eye on him. His hands don't shake, years of delicate mechanical work have trained that out of him, but he can feel his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything rides on the next 60 seconds. If this engine fires clean and runs smooth, he might get a chance to save the rest of the fleet. If it doesn't, he's looking at disciplinary action for unauthorized modifications to military property. He climbs into the driver's seat. The worn canvas smells like dust and sweat and the particular metallic tang that all military vehicles acquire after a few months in theater. His hand finds the starter, and he takes one breath, just one, before engaging it. The engine turns over once. Twice. 3 times. Catches. The sound that emerges from under that olive drab hood is music, mechanical and pure. Not the labored, knocking protest of an engine dying by degrees, but the smooth, confident rumble of a power plant running exactly as it was designed to. Maybe better. The tachometer needle settles at a steady 800 revolutions per minute. The temperature gauge, with its jury-rigged copper wire connections, shows readings in the safe zone. No smoke. No rattling. No death knells. Henderson lets it run for 30 seconds, then revs it gently. The engine responds with immediate, linear power. He brings it back to idle. Perfect. He kills the ignition, and the silence that follows feels charged with possibility. Captain Morrison steps forward, placing one hand on the hood. Testing the temperature, Henderson realizes. Smart. Overheating had been the primary failure mode, and a cool-running engine proves nothing if you can't sustain it under load. How long has this vehicle been operational since your modifications? Morrison asks. Finished the work about 40 minutes ago, sir. This is the first start. The major from division looks skeptical. A successful start proves nothing, Private. The real test is sustained operation under combat load. These vehicles fail after hours of running, not minutes. Then let's run it, sir. Henderson surprises himself with his own boldness, but he can see the logic pathway opening before him. They need proof. He needs to provide it. Simple as that. Morrison considers this, then nods slowly. Lieutenant Cooper, you're qualified on the Willys MB? One of the flanking lieutenants, a lean man with Kansas written all over his accent, straightens. Yes, sir. Take Private Henderson and this vehicle. Make a supply run to the ammunition depot at Ponte de Rillo and back. Morrison consults a map he's pulled from his pocket. 18 miles round trip. Roads are shit. Loaded with ammunition cases on the return trip. I want a full combat load, not training weights. Sir. Lieutenant Cooper's acknowledgement is crisp, but Henderson can see the calculation in the man's eyes. 18 miles round trip in mid-morning Sicilian heat, fully loaded, over roads that are barely tracks. It's the kind of run that's been killing Jeeps for weeks. Henderson, you ride along. If that engine fails, you fix it on site or you walk back. Clear? Crystal, sir. 10 minutes later, Henderson is in the passenger seat of his modified Jeep with Lieutenant Cooper behind the wheel, heading northeast on a road that's more optimism than infrastructure. The Sicilian countryside rolls past in shades of brown and gold, olive groves, stone walls, the occasional farmhouse showing battle damage. It would be beautiful if they weren't in the middle of a war. Cooper drives with the aggressive confidence of someone who's learned that hesitation gets you killed. He doesn't baby the engine, doesn't try to preserve the vehicle. He drives it like it's meant to be driven in combat conditions, hard, fast, and with complete disregard for what the manual defines as appropriate operating parameters. The Jeep responds beautifully. Your modifications, Cooper says after the first 10 minutes, his voice raised to carry over the engine noise and wind. Walk me through what you did. Henderson wasn't expecting technical curiosity from an officer, but he'll take it. Main issue is heat dissipation, sir. The factory cooling system is adequate for moderate climates but undersized for sustained operation in high ambient temperatures. I increased coolant capacity by adding an auxiliary overflow reservoir and improved circulation efficiency by rerouting 2 hoses to create better flow geometry. He gestures vaguely toward the engine compartment. Also advanced the ignition timing by 3 degrees to compensate for low-octane fuel. Better combustion efficiency means less waste heat. The wooden spacer in the oil system? So Cooper has been briefed on the details. Interesting. Yes, sir. The oil pressure relief valve was opening too early, limiting lubrication to the hottest engine components under load. A 3mm spacer increases the threshold pressure, ensuring adequate oil flow where it's needed most. Wood works for this application because it's dimensionally stable and won't create metal particles if it starts to wear. Cooper navigates around a shell crater that's turned half the road into a geological feature. The Jeep takes it without hesitation. You know that kind of modification could get you court-martialed. Yes, sir. But so could letting men die because their vehicles won't run. Henderson keeps his voice neutral, but there's steel underneath. Sir, respectfully, I didn't join up to follow regulations. I joined up to win a war. Sometimes those aren't the same thing. They drive in silence for a moment, and Henderson wonders if he's just talked himself into even deeper trouble. But then Cooper laughs, short and sharp. You sound like my grandfather. He ran a ranch in Texas, used to say that engineers design for how things should work, but farmers fix for how things actually work. Said the difference between the two is about 3 miles of fence line and a Monday morning. Your grandfather was a smart man, sir. He was. He also got himself court-martialed in the First War for modifying a truck against orders. Cooper's voice carries no judgment, just statement of fact. He was right to do it, by the way. His modifications got adopted Army-wide 6 months later. But they still court-martialed him first, because that's how the Army works. We reward innovation retrospectively, but we punish it in real time. The depot at Ponte di Rillo sits in what used to be an Italian military compound, now flying American flags and bustling with the controlled chaos of military logistics. They load the Jeep with ammunition cases, .30 caliber for the M1 Garand, .45 ACP for the Thompson submachine guns, grenades, mortar rounds. Cooper doesn't stop at the recommended load capacity. He keeps loading until the suspension is compressed and the rear bumper is sitting dangerously close to the tires. If we're testing this machine, Private, we're going to actually test it. The return trip is slower, harder, and infinitely more stressful. The overloaded Jeep struggles with the grade on the hills, but it struggles without failing. The engine temperature rises. Henderson watches it like a hawk, waiting for that needle to climb into the danger zone, but it stabilizes just below the red line and stays there. The engine note remains steady, no knocking, no pinging, no sounds of impending mechanical death. They're 3 miles from base when they hit the checkpoint that's been set up to screen returning vehicles. MPs wave them through, but Henderson catches a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror that makes his stomach drop. Another Jeep, one of the unmodified standard models, is being pushed to the side of the road by 3 sweating soldiers. Steam is pouring from under its hood in great white clouds. Dead. Another casualty. Cooper sees it too. He doesn't say anything, but Henderson watches the lieutenant's jaw tighten. They roll back into the battalion motor pool at 0947 hours, exactly 77 minutes after they departed. The crowd has grown, if anything. The entire command staff is still there, now joined by what looks like half the battalion's NCOs and a sprinkling of curious enlisted men. Henderson climbs out and immediately pops the hood. This is the moment of truth. He places his hand on the engine block, feeling for temperature. It's hot, very hot, but not dangerously so. Nothing's smoking. Nothing's leaking. The jury-rigged temperature gauge shows readings that are elevated but well within safe parameters. He checks the oil, the coolant level, the belt tension. Everything is exactly as it should be. Tech Sergeant Archer is the first to approach, his experienced eye cataloging every detail of the engine compartment. He checks the same things Henderson just checked, then a few more, then steps back with an expression that might be approval or might be indigestion. Private, you got any idea what you've done here? Fixed a Jeep, Sergeant. You made the Army's cooling system obsolete. Archer's voice carries across the motor pool, and Henderson realizes this statement is for the benefit of the assembled crowd. This engine just ran 18 miles, fully loaded, in conditions that have been killing vehicles left and right, and it's running cooler than a factory-spec engine at idle in Ohio. That ain't luck. That's engineering. The major from Division Motor Transport looks like someone has replaced his coffee with vinegar. Sergeant, you cannot possibly be suggesting that we replace the established factory specifications with field modifications dreamed up by an untrained private. Untrained? Archer's voice could cut steel. Sir, respectfully, this private has more practical mechanical knowledge than half the maintenance officers I've worked with. He understands engines. Not the theory of engines, not the paperwork about engines. He understands the actual physical reality of internal combustion under adverse conditions. And right now, that understanding is worth more than a dozen technical manuals that don't account for the environment we're actually fighting in. Morrison has been silent through this exchange, watching. Now he speaks, his voice carrying the absolute authority of command. Private Henderson, you said you could fix the rest of the fleet. I'm giving you 72 hours. You'll work with Tech Sergeant Archer and the battalion maintenance section. Any vehicle you modify needs to be documented. I want to know exactly what you're changing and why. Any vehicle you modify becomes your personal responsibility. If it fails, that failure is on you. If it succeeds, he pauses, and something that might be a smile ghosts across his face. If it succeeds, we'll figure out what to do with you then. Questions? No, sir. Then get to work. What follows is 72 hours that Henderson will remember for the rest of his life as both the most exhausting and most satisfying work he's ever done. Tech Sergeant Archer assigns him 3 assistants: Private Tony Marchetti from Brooklyn, Corporal James Jim Davis from Georgia, and Private Eugene Park from California. They're actual trained mechanics from the motor pool, men who've spent months maintaining vehicles by the book and watching those vehicles die despite their best efforts. Henderson expects resistance, maybe resentment at being subordinated to a farm boy with unorthodox ideas. What he gets instead is desperate eagerness to learn something, anything, that actually works. "Teach us," Marchetti says bluntly as they gather around the first Jeep at 1,100 hours on day 1. "Whatever you know that we don't, teach us. Because what we've been doing ain't working, and I'm tired of sending drivers out in vehicles that I know are going to fail." So Henderson teaches. He starts with principles, not procedures. An engine is a heat machine, he explains, hands already dirty from pulling the first radiator. Everything it does generates heat as waste. Gasoline has about 115,000 BTUs per gallon. About 30% of that becomes mechanical work. The rest becomes heat that needs to go somewhere. In moderate climates, the factory cooling system can handle that. Here, in this heat, running these loads, on these roads, the system is overwhelmed. We need to increase its capacity. The modifications he makes are systematic and documented. For each vehicle, he adds auxiliary coolant reservoirs fabricated from fuel cans. Reroutes coolant hoses to improve flow geometry. Advances ignition timing by 3 degrees to improve combustion efficiency. Modifies the oil pressure relief valve with carved wooden spacers. Adjusts carburetor mixture to compensate for poor fuel quality. Adds makeshift air deflectors to improve airflow across radiators. But more than the physical modifications, he teaches his crew to think about why they're making changes, not just how. "Don't just follow my steps," he insists during a midnight session on the 8th Jeep, by lamplight in the dusty motor pool. "Understand the principle. Then if you encounter a different problem, you can apply the same thinking to find a solution." That's what separates a parts replacer from a mechanic. Davis, the Georgian corporal, proves to be a natural diagnostician with an ear for engine sounds that rivals Henderson's own. Park, quiet and methodical, excels at the precise work of carburetor adjustment. And Marchetti, despite his city boy background, shows an intuitive grasp of fluid dynamics that makes him perfect for the cooling system modifications. By the end of the first day, they've completed 5 vehicles. By the end of the second day, 11 more. They work in shifts, sleep in 4-hour blocks, and exist on coffee, cigarettes, and cold rations eaten while covered in engine oil. Sergeant Kowalski watches from a distance, his expression inscrutable. He doesn't interfere, doesn't help, just watches. Henderson pretends not to notice. On the 3rd day, as they're finishing the 23rd vehicle, Captain Morrison appears with Lieutenant Cooper and a colonel that Henderson doesn't recognize. The colonel's insignia marks him as being from the 2nd Armored Division, and his presence makes several nearby soldiers suddenly stand straighter. "Private Henderson," Morrison's voice is formal, which immediately puts Henderson on alert. "This is Colonel William Patterson, Division Motor Transport. He'd like to observe your work." Henderson straightens, salutes, and tries not to look too much like someone who hasn't showered in 3 days. "Yes, sir." Patterson is maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who's been in the army since before Henderson was born. His eyes, though, they're sharp and assessing, missing nothing. He walks around the Jeep Henderson's crew is working on, studying the modifications with the kind of attention to detail that suggests actual mechanical knowledge. "Talk me through it," Patterson says. Not an order, but not quite a request either. Henderson does, explaining each modification, the principle behind it, the expected result, and how they're tracking performance. Patterson asks questions, good questions, technical questions that reveal he actually understands internal combustion engines, not just military requisition forms. "The wooden spacer in the oil pressure system," Patterson finally says. "That's the modification that's got everyone in a twist. You understand why?" "Yes, sir." "It's unorthodox. It violates the principle of using only approved materials and engine components. And if it fails, wood particles in the oil system could cause catastrophic damage. But sir, with respect, catastrophic future damage is a better option than guaranteed current failure. These Jeeps are dying now. My modification might cause problems later. I'll take might overrule in combat conditions. Patterson's expression doesn't change, but Henderson sees something flicker in those sharp eyes. Approval, maybe. Or recognition. You sound like someone I knew in the First War. He was always modifying equipment against orders. Drove his officers crazy. He was also usually right. The colonel pauses. He made it home. Made colonel himself, eventually. You remind me of him. Henderson doesn't know what to say to that, so he says nothing. I'm authorizing field trials, Patterson continues, pulling a document from his pocket. Your modifications will be tested under combat conditions across 3 battalions. If they prove effective, we'll formalize the specifications and send them up the chain. If they prove defective, he lets that hang. I understand, sir. I don't think you do, Private. Patterson's voice drops, becomes almost paternal. The Army doesn't like innovators. We like standardization, procedure, predictability. When you change something, you introduce uncertainty, and uncertainty in military equipment gets people killed. But you know what else gets people killed? Equipment that doesn't work. You're betting that your uncertainty is better than our certainty. I'm giving you a chance to prove that. Don't make me regret it. I won't, sir. August 2nd, 1943. 0430 hours. The battalion begins its advance toward Palermo, and Henderson's modified Jeeps go to war. 23 vehicles, each carrying Henderson's farm boy fixes, integrated into a mechanized column pushing northwest through terrain that breaks conventional military vehicles like toys. Mountain roads. Punishing heat. Fully loaded with ammunition, supplies, and exhausted soldiers who need transport more than they need sleep. Henderson isn't driving. He's been assigned to a maintenance unit that follows the column, ready to respond to failures when, not if, they occur. He rides in the back of a truck with Marchetti, Davis, and Park, surrounded by parts, tools, and the growing conviction that the next few days will either vindicate his work or destroy him. The first hours are textbook. The column advances, makes contact with light German resistance, pushes through. Standard infantry operations, nothing special. Then, around 0830, the radio crackles with the words every mechanic dreads, vehicle down. Need maintenance forward. Henderson and his crew are moving before the transmission ends. The maintenance truck pushes forward through the column until they find the disabled vehicle on the side of the road, steam pouring from under its hood. Henderson's heart sinks. It's one of the modified Jeeps, and it's failed spectacularly in front of witnesses that include at least 2 officers and what looks like a war correspondent with a camera. He jumps up before the truck fully stops, heading for the failed Jeep with his tool bag. The driver, a corporal he doesn't recognize, is standing next to the vehicle with the expression of someone who knows he's part of a story that's not going to end well. What happened? Henderson asks, already popping the hood. Don't know, Private. Was running fine, then the temperature gauge spiked red and she started making a noise like someone was beating on the block with a hammer. Shut her down immediately. The engine compartment is a sauna. Henderson can barely get his hand near the engine block, it's so hot. But he forces himself to do the diagnostic, checking coolant level, oil level, looking for obvious failures. And he finds it almost immediately. One of the auxiliary coolant hoses, the ones he added, has split along its length. The system lost pressure, lost coolant, and overheated in minutes. It's not his modification design that failed. It's just a bad hose, the kind of failure that happens in any vehicle. But that won't matter to the officers watching, to the war correspondent with his notebook. All they'll see is that Henderson's modified vehicle failed, and that failure is evidence that farm boy mechanics can't be trusted. Unless he fixes it. Now. Fast enough to show that the modification actually makes the vehicle more maintainable, not less. Park, get me the spare hose kit from the truck. Marchetti, Davis, help me drain what's left of the coolant so I can get access. Move! His crew moves with the practiced efficiency of men who've worked together under pressure. 10 minutes later, Henderson has the failed hose removed. 15 minutes after that, a new hose is installed, properly secured, and the system is refilled with coolant. He starts the engine, watches the temperature gauge settle into normal range, and kills it again. Total repair time, 19 minutes. He turns to the watching officers, forcing confidence into his voice. Sir, routine hose failure. Not related to the modification design. Vehicle is operational and ready to return to service. One of the officers, a Major Henderson doesn't recognize, steps forward. Private, that hose split because of the increased pressure in your modified cooling system. The failure is absolutely related to your design. Henderson's mind races. The Major's not wrong, technically. The higher coolant capacity and improved flow geometry do create marginally higher pressures in the system. But that's not what caused this failure. Sir, respectfully, that hose was already compromised. You can see the wear pattern here. He shows them the failed hose, pointing to cracking that predates the catastrophic failure. This would have failed regardless of modification. The difference is that the standard system would have failed gradually, potentially going unnoticed until the engine seized. My modification made the failure dramatic and immediate, which forced the driver to shut down before serious damage occurred. The engine is undamaged. In a standard vehicle, this same failure mode would have resulted in a destroyed engine requiring complete replacement. The Major looks skeptical, but Henderson sees Lieutenant Cooper pushing through the crowd, and relief washes through him. Major, Private Henderson is correct, Cooper says with the authority of someone who's seen this before. I've personally witnessed standard configuration vehicles lose cooling system pressure gradually and suffer catastrophic engine damage before the drivers notice the problem. Henderson's modification makes failures obvious, which is actually a safety improvement. The Major doesn't look convinced, but he doesn't push the argument either. Get this vehicle back in the column, Private. The column continues. Over the next 4 days, as the battalion pushes toward Palermo through some of the hardest fighting they've encountered, Henderson's Jeeps perform like machines possessed. Standard vehicles continue to fail, 7 more by Henderson's count, while the modified vehicles keep running. Keep hauling ammunition. Keep evacuating wounded. Keep doing the unglamorous, essential work that allows an army to function in combat. On August 5th, Henderson is called forward again, but this time it's not for a failure. Captain Morrison wants him at the command post, immediately. He finds Morrison standing next to a Jeep, one of Henderson's modified ones, talking with Colonel Patterson and 2 officers Henderson doesn't recognize. One of them wears the stars of a brigadier general. Henderson's stomach drops. Generals don't show up for good news to privates. Private First Class Henderson, reporting as ordered, sir. The general, Henderson, catches the name Truscott on his uniform, regards him with the kind of penetrating stare that makes you want to confess to crimes you didn't commit. Private, I understand you've been making unauthorized modifications to government property. Sir, I understand these modifications violate established technical manuals and procurement procedures. Sir, yes, sir, but I understand that these modifications were made without formal approval from Division Motor Transport. Henderson has no answer to that. It's all true. Yes, sir. Outstanding work, son. Truscott's stern expression cracks into something that might be a smile. The modified vehicles in your battalion have maintained a 92% operational readiness rate compared to 61% for standard configuration vehicles across the division. Your modifications have effectively increased our mechanized transport capacity by 1/3 without requisitioning a single new vehicle. Colonel Patterson has recommended that your modification protocol be adopted division-wide, and I'm approving it. Henderson's brain, overloaded by 4 days of stress and mechanical work, takes several seconds to process this. Sir? You're being promoted to corporal and assigned to battalion maintenance section. Your new responsibilities include supervising engine modifications across the entire battalion and training mechanics from other battalions who want to learn your techniques. Truscott pulls papers from his aide and hands them to Morrison. The private who got mocked for farm boy tinkering is now teaching professional mechanics how to keep the Army's vehicles running. How's that feel, Corporal? Feels like I need more coffee, sir. Truscott laughs, actual genuine laughter. I like this kid. Patterson, make sure he stays alive. I want him working on trucks next. September 14th, 1943. Henderson is now Corporal Henderson, though he still doesn't quite believe it. His workshop has evolved from a patch of dirt in Sicily to a more organized maintenance facility on the Italian mainland, where the battalion has been operating for 3 weeks. The modifications he developed in those desperate 72 hours have spread far beyond his original 23 vehicles. His techniques are now standard procedure across the entire 2nd Armored Division, and mechanics from other units keep showing up to learn the Henderson method, as it's being called. He's in the middle of teaching a class on coolant flow dynamics to 6 mechanics from the 3rd Infantry Division when a staff car pulls up, unusual in itself, but what's more unusual is the civilian who climbs out. The man is maybe 60, wearing a suit that's seen better days and carrying a briefcase that's covered in travel stickers. Tech Sergeant Archer appears from somewhere, walking with the civilian toward Henderson's maintenance bay. Henderson, you got a visitor. Come meet Mr. Delmar Roos. The name means nothing to Henderson until Archer adds, Chief Engineer at Willys Overland. He designed the Jeep you've been modifying. Oh shit. Henderson's mind immediately catalogs the magnitude of the situation. The man who designed the vehicle is here to see the farm boy who's been telling the entire army how to fix the design's shortcomings. This will either be the most interesting conversation of Henderson's life or the beginning of his court-martial. Roos extends a hand, and his grip is firm, his palm calloused. An engineer who actually builds things, not just designs them. Corporal Henderson. I've been reading reports about your cooling system modifications for the last month. Flew over specifically to talk to you. Sir, I hope I haven't, Henderson starts, but Roos waves him off. You haven't broken anything that wasn't already breaking. Walk me through what you did. I want to see your modifications firsthand. For the next 2 hours, Henderson gives the chief engineer of Willys Overland a comprehensive technical briefing on every modification he made and why. Roos doesn't just listen, he engages, asks probing questions, challenges assumptions, and occasionally pulls out a notebook to sketch alternative approaches. It's the most intellectually stimulating conversation Henderson has had since joining the Army. Finally, standing next to a modified Jeep with its hood open, Roos speaks. You want to know something, Corporal? You're not wrong. About any of it. We designed this vehicle for American conditions. Moderate temperatures, good fuel, maintained roads, reasonable load limits. We knew it would be used in other environments, but we were under brutal deadlines and tighter budgets, and we had to make choices. We chose versatility over optimization. We chose good enough for most conditions over perfect for specific conditions. He runs his hand along one of Henderson's auxiliary coolant hoses, examining the installation. Your modifications are specific optimizations for extreme conditions. They sacrifice some of the general-purpose versatility for significantly better performance in high-temperature, high-load environments. That's smart engineering. That's responsive design. And it's something we couldn't do from Toledo because we didn't have your operational data. Sir, I didn't mean to suggest that the original design was inadequate. But it was inadequate. For these conditions, it absolutely was. And you know what the most damning thing is? You figured out the fixes using scavenged parts and field tools. We have engineering labs, test facilities, unlimited access to materials, and months of development time. You had engine oil and urgency. And you solved it faster than we could have. Roos closes the hood, then turns to face Henderson directly. We're going to incorporate your modifications into production vehicles. Not all of them. The wooden spacer in the oil system, while brilliant, can't be mass-produced reliably. But the cooling system improvements, the ignition timing adjustment, the improved airflow geometry, those will be factory standard by next spring. There will be a technical bulletin sent to every motor pool and every theater explaining the modification protocol for existing vehicles. And I'm going to make sure that bulletin has your name on it. Henderson doesn't know what to say. His throat feels tight. Sir, I just wanted the Jeeps to work. That's what makes you a good engineer, son. You wanted them to work, so you made them work. You didn't wait for permission or approval or institutional validation. You identified a problem, developed a solution, and implemented it. That's engineering in its purest form. Roos smiles. Though between you and me, try to get permission next time before you start carving engine parts out of wood. Saves paperwork. Before leaving, Roos pulls a small metal part from his briefcase. It looks like the wooden spacer Henderson has been carving, but machined from brass. This is the production version of your oil pressure modification. Machined to precise tolerances, made from materials that won't degrade. We're manufacturing 10,000 of them. They'll be shipped to motor pools in North Africa, Italy, and eventually to every theater. Millions of dollars worth of parts, mass-produced and distributed, all because a farm boy from Nebraska decided that the manual wasn't good enough. Roos hands Henderson the brass spacer. Keep this. Show it to anyone who tells you that you need a degree to understand engines. You prove something important. Knowledge comes from experience as much as education. Maybe more, when the experience is relevant. The Italian campaign is where Henderson's modifications prove their worth beyond any doubt. The mountains of central Italy are worse than Sicily ever was. Colder, wetter, with roads that are optimistic suggestions rather than actual infrastructure. Supply lines stretch across hundreds of miles of terrain that seems designed specifically to destroy vehicles. And through it all, Henderson's modified Jeeps keep running. By January 1944, Henderson has been promoted again, staff sergeant now, running the entire battalion maintenance section. His techniques have spread across the theater. Mechanics arrive from other divisions for week-long intensive training courses where Henderson and his crew teach not just the modifications, but the thinking behind them. How to diagnose problems by sound and feel. How to improvise solutions from available materials. How to keep vehicles running when the supply chain fails and the book doesn't have answers. The wooden spacer has been replaced by the brass version Roos showed him, but everything else remains largely as Henderson originally designed it in that desperate 72-hour sprint in Sicily. Thousands of Jeeps across multiple theaters now carry his fingerprints, metaphorically if not literally. In March 1944, Henderson receives a letter from home. His father's handwriting, familiar and careful. The farm is doing well. His mother sends her love. And then, at the bottom, son, the army sent someone to talk to us about what you've been doing over there. A colonel, very official. He said you saved a lot of lives by making vehicles work better. Your mother cried. I'm proud of you. You took what you learned fixing tractors and used it to help people. That's all a man can do. Come home safe. Henderson reads the letter 3 times, then folds it carefully and puts it in his pocket next to the brass spacer Roos gave him. Talismans from 2 different worlds, the farm boy who learned machines in dirt and diesel, and the soldier who applied that knowledge in fire and blood. Jacob Henderson returned to Nebraska in November 1945, carrying a chest full of medals he never talks about and knowledge he uses every day. He took over the family farm and ran it for 46 years, becoming regionally famous for keeping equipment running long past its expected service life. Neighboring farmers brought him equipment that other mechanics had declared unrepairable, and Henderson usually had it running within a day or 2 using improvised parts and creative solutions. The same principles that kept Jeeps running through Sicily and Italy worked just as well on tractors in Nebraska. He married a schoolteacher named Dorothy in 1948. They had 3 children. He taught each of them about engines, about problem solving, about the difference between doing things by the book and doing things right. In 1987, the U.S. Army invited him to Fort Benning to speak at a symposium on field maintenance and adaptive engineering. He was 64 years old, still strong, still sharp. He stood before an auditorium full of officers and engineers and told them the same thing he'd told his children: a machine doesn't care about your manual. It cares about fuel, air, spark, and lubrication. Everything else is just paperwork. The speech was recorded. It's still used at some Army technical schools. Henderson died in 2003 at age 80, working on a neighbor's combine harvester when his heart simply stopped. They found him with a wrench in his hand. The engine he'd been fixing successfully started and running smooth. It's how he would have wanted to go: one last mechanical problem solved, one last engine brought back from the dead. The modifications Henderson developed in 72 desperate hours became standard in military vehicle doctrine. His cooling system improvements were incorporated into production vehicles, saving countless lives and missions across multiple theaters. The Henderson method, prioritizing function over procedure, adaptation over standardization, influenced post-war military maintenance training and contributed to the development of field modification protocols that remain in use today. But Henderson's real legacy isn't in the specific modifications he made to one model of vehicle. It's in what his story represents about innovation, knowledge, and the value of practical experience. Military historians still debate the Henderson case study. How much innovation should field personnel be allowed before it becomes dangerous? Where's the line between adaptive problem-solving and reckless disregard for safety protocols? Henderson's success proved that rigid adherence to manuals could be as deadly as careless improvisation, but his story doesn't provide easy answers about where that balance should lie. What's undeniable is that when the system failed, when the vehicles designed by experts with unlimited resources couldn't handle real-world conditions, it was a farm boy with baling wire knowledge who found the solution. Not because he was smarter than the engineers in Toledo, but because he was there, in the dirt and heat and desperation, with both the knowledge and the courage to try something different. The Jeeps Henderson modified are in museums now. Restored, pristine, displayed behind velvet ropes with plaques explaining their historical significance. Veterans who drove those vehicles occasionally visit, old men with canes and fading memories, and they'll touch the olive drab paint and remember when these machines were covered in mud and blood, when they ran through fire because a kid from Nebraska refused to accept that by the book was good enough. The brass spacer, the production version of Henderson's carved wooden prototype, remained standard in military vehicle maintenance kits for 23 years, until engine designs evolved beyond the technology it was meant to improve. Millions were manufactured. Most were eventually discarded as obsolete. But a few survive in collections in museums, small brass testimonies to the moment when practical knowledge trumped institutional authority. Henderson never sought fame. He gave interviews reluctantly, wrote no memoirs, and generally treated his wartime innovations as nothing more than common sense applied to obvious problems. When pressed, he'd say, "I just made the Jeeps work." That's what you do when things are broken. You fix them. That simple philosophy, identify the problem, understand the principles, implement the solution, is his real contribution. Not the specific modifications, but the mindset that created them. The willingness to question established wisdom when the evidence demands it. The courage to try something new when the old ways are failing. The humility to learn from tractors and apply that knowledge to tanks. In an age of increasingly complex technology and specialized knowledge, Henderson's story reminds us that expertise comes in many forms. The farm boy who learned engines by necessity possessed knowledge that formal education couldn't replicate. His hands-on experience with machines that had to work or families didn't eat gave him insights that laboratory testing couldn't provide. The vehicles Henderson saved carried ammunition that won battles. They evacuated wounded who survived because they reached hospitals in time. They maintained supply lines that kept armies functioning. The ripple effects of his modifications extended far beyond the immediate mechanical improvements. They enabled operations, saved lives, and contributed to victory in ways that can never be fully calculated. When asked, late in life, what he wanted people to remember about his service, Henderson gave an answer that surprised the interviewer: remember the other mechanics. The ones who followed the book and watched their vehicles die and felt helpless because the system wouldn't let them try anything different. I got lucky. I had officers who gave me a chance to prove my ideas. Most mechanics don't get that chance. Remember them, not me. But we remember both. The mechanics who struggled within the system, and the farm boy who changed it.